Excellencies, and distinguished speakers. On behalf of Cosmos Foundation, I welcome you to today's webinar on Bangladesh-Australia relations, Prognosis for the Future. I'll now run through the program itinerary for today's event, which will be recorded today and broadcast at a later date on our media partner United News of Bangladesh's channels, details of which will be shared with all of you. Today, we will commence with welcome remarks by Mr. Inayatullah Khan, Chairman of Cosmos Foundation, who will then hand it over to our Chair, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, to deliver his remarks. The keynote address will be delivered by His Excellency Jeremy Brewer, High Commissioner of Australia to Bangladesh, followed by our 5 distinguished discussants who will each speak for a duration of 10 minutes. We'll begin with Ambassador Shamsher Mobin Chaudhry, followed by Dr. Deborah Bhattacharya, Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, Brigadier General Shahidul Anam Khan, and last but not the least, Ambassador Tariq Karim. Thank you, and we very much look forward to the discussions today. I will now hand it over to Mr. Inayatullah Khan to commence our session.
Thank you, Nahar. Good morning. It's a matter of great joy for us at the Cosmos Foundation to host High Commissioner Jeremy Brewer at our Ambassadors Lecture Series event. It underscores a continuing relationship between us and the High Commission. I warmly recall that one of the final engagements of his predecessor, our good friend Julia Niblet, prior to her departure from Bangladesh, was to be a guest speaker in our in-person event in Dhaka. So allow me to welcome you, Mr. High Commissioner, in the same spirit of friendship and cooperation. A very warm welcome also to our other distinguished discussants. I have no doubt that the keynote address of our chief guest and the remarks of the discussants will comprise a most stimulating deliberations on Bangladesh-Australia relations. Our bilateral relations date back almost to the first weeks of the nascence of Bangladesh. It was the broadcast of Bangladesh's Declaration of Independence on Radio Australia, through which the rest of the world first came to know about it. When independence finally came, Australia became the 4th country and the first among the developed world to accord us recognition on New Year's Eve in 1972. Those of us who are senior enough to have witnessed those happy times fondly remember the first Australian High Commissioner, Jim Allen, who spoke most fluent Bengali, having served, as I understand, as a Civil Supplies Department official in Bengal. Australians have a large footprint in the field of international development. Australia is seen as a trusted development partner in Bangladesh right since the 70s, when they provided cyclone shelters in villages all over the country. As a result, many Australian professionals also have experience of living and working in Bangladesh. The 2 countries continue to find new paths of collaboration and connection between their people, institutions, and businesses. From our own positions, the people of 2 countries, including an increasing number who enjoy the citizenship of both, always aspire to do more together as countries and as people. The conclusion of Australia-Bangladesh Trade and Investment Framework Arrangement, TIFA, on 15th of September is therefore timely and could provide the necessary boost towards a more significant economic relationship. While TIFAs are seen as mostly symbolic, they do signal an injection of commitment and ambition, which is what the next phase of the relationship between Bangladesh and Australia actually needs. So we are on the right track. The current bilateral trade relationship is modest. The Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Traders' latest figures show that Bangladesh is Australia's 30th largest partner, with two-way trade amounting to about $2 billion. Cricket was always a strong bond. One of my most joyous moments of childhood was to see Ray Lindwall bowl in the wicket of the Dhaka Stadium. As our peoples are linked, our bilateral collaboration, happily, is not confined to G2G matters only. Australian NGOs have become a great source of developmental support in this country. As a private sector entrepreneur, I rejoice in the growth of mutual opportunities in this sector including IT, on the Rohingya refugee crisis. When many countries in the world have not distinguished themselves by remaining sadly silent, Australia has come forward to hold our hands. Currently, in the fight against COVID, Australian support has been enthusiastic and substantial. Australia has some of the best defense studies institutions in the world, and opportunities could be found for Bangladeshi officers who enjoy the respect of their fellow professionals from around the world at the Australian War College, the National Security College, or the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security. The two countries share a common commitment to peacekeeping, and networks could be developed through targeted exchanges between the Bangladeshi and Australian peacekeeping training centers. It is true that in this region, India would be Australia's principal partner. But we are delighted that Australia does not look at South Asia only through Indian lens. The ever-burgeoning Bangladesh-Australia cooperation, I hope, can become a testimony to that. We have also noticed with interest Australia's increasing involvement as a key player in the wider Indo-Pacific region. I'm sure some of these elements will feature in our discussions today. We're delighted that we will have Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, the renowned scholar diplomat, the Foreign Affairs advisor during the past caretaker government, and the president of Cosmos Foundation will chair this event. And it's now my pleasure to invite him to conduct the proceedings. Over to Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry.
Thank you, Inayat. I should like to cut to the chase, of course, but might want to say a few words before that. I'm delighted to be able to conduct yet another important event of the Cosmos Ambassadors Lecture Series. I welcome all participants, in particular our keynote speaker today, High Commissioner Jeremy Brewer. He is a career diplomat of prodigious experience, having served in the Gulf and the Pacific, with stints as ambassador to the UAE in Vanuatu, High Commissioner to Vanuatu, really, it's a communal country. He's also held important senior positions at DFAT in Canberra, which is the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He was educated in two outstanding citadels of learning in Australia, the universities of Melbourne and Adelaide. We know, all of us here today, Australia to be a country of generous and friendly people, so intensely egalitarian that they will chop off the tall poppy. Not too many statues there that I know of, of Don Bradman or Yvonne Goolagong. Of gentle and simple lifestyle, where the jolly swagman is a national icon. And a great cause for concern in the towns used to be, in the words of the singer Slim Dusty, a pub with no beer. But the world is in a flux and things change. And Australia's role and importance, as they grow, so do its interests, responsibilities, and apprehensions, as we see find fruition in groupings like Five Eyes, Quad, or AUKUS. Some of these, I assume, will come up in our discussions this morning. Bangladesh-Australia ties go far beyond curry and cricket that you mentioned, Inayat. Shared liberal values make us natural partners. Next year, we shall be celebrating 50 years of our diplomatic relations. From the outset, and Inayat, you mentioned Jim Allen, there are other senior Australian diplomats like Sir Lawrence McIntyre at the UN, and Philip Flood here in Dhaka. And I recall how each was a source of tremendous moral and material support to Bangladesh. The focus on aid at that time has, of course, shifted since to trade and commerce, which seem to have grown exponentially, leading to, as we've just heard, a signing of TIFA. We are also looking to expanded collaboration across a whole range of activities, e-commerce, infrastructure, power and energy, water, sanitation and hygiene, so-called WASH, and also in tapping the blue economy, which is our maritime resources. Market access, of course, will assume importance as we graduate out of the list of least developed countries. Now, our partnership on a global level is also reflected in many common positions that we adopt in multilateral fora such as the United Nations and also the WTO. At a regional level, on the Indo-Pacific, for instance, I'm sure we are understanding, of course, of the fact that Australia would need to act in pursuit of its perceived national self-interest and security. As I'm positive that Australia also understand, that is, about our need for a sharp development orientation in foreign policy and our preference for conflict avoidance. Now, with these few words, might I invite you, High Commissioner, to the microphone.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Iftikhar, for that very flattering introduction. I'm sure that I'm not quite as eminent as you pretended, but it's nice to hear nonetheless. And thank you to Inayatullah and Nahar for the very welcome introductory remarks. I am delighted to join you all this morning for this Cosmos Foundation roundtable discussion on Bangladesh and Australia and our relations and the prognosis for the future. And I wish you all good morning. Shuvo Shokal. It's great to see so many familiar names and faces on my screen. And just reminds me that we've been kind of in this very strange environment over the last, it must be close to 18, 20 months even by now, where we've been kind of shut inside for a good part of the time. And as a diplomat, it's not a welcome kind of an environment to work in, as we like to get out and meet people and understand countries. It's not very easy to do when you're really limited in the movements that you can make. But as I say, it's great to see so many names on the screen, so many familiar faces, and I very much hope that before too long, with the recent easing of COVID restrictions, we'll be able to see each other in person once again. So we have, I think, discussed already the approaching 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between our two countries. And I think it's a really good time, therefore, for us to reflect on the friendship between us. So today, and this will depend to an extent on the subsequent discussion too, I'd like to concentrate on two key factors in our relationship. The first is our trade and investment connections and how we might develop those further. And the second is our common concerns and shared interests in our Indo-Pacific region, including COVID-19, which I've already mentioned, our shared interests in a free and open region, and of course, climate change, which is an issue of importance globally and to both of our countries. We, as Australians, have been very proudly part of the story of Bangladesh and Bengal for quite a long time. And we're proud too that, as has been mentioned, we were among the first countries in the world and the first Western country to recognise the newly independent nation of Bangladesh. And shortly thereafter, in January 1972, we established formal diplomatic relations and opened our diplomatic mission here in Dhaka. We were subsequently active in helping Bangladesh secure membership of the United Nations. And importantly, I think none of these moves was at all controversial in Australia at the time. They had widespread support at a popular level and very strong bilateral backing in our parliament. Quite a few individual Australians have helped make a difference here too. And Inayatullah has mentioned already Jim Allen, who was the first High Commissioner and in fact was already in place in what was the predecessor of the High Commission before independence. And his ability in the Bengali language, I'm afraid, leaves me very much in the shade, sadly. Another person who we remember fondly is William Odelland, who made a very important contribution during Bangladesh's liberation war. And he is still, as far as I know, the only foreigner to have received the Bir Pratik Medal for bravery. Of course, as well, Lord Richard Casey, who was an eminent Australian Foreign Minister and then Governor-General of Australia, and after whom our Foreign Ministry headquarters in Canberra is named, was Governor of Bengal from 1944 to 1946. I wasn't planning to mention cricket, but I feel that I must, given that we're currently in the early stages of the the T20 World Cup in the UAE and Oman, which I've already started to watch with some interest. And I was very privileged to be able to watch recent games here in Dhaka between Australia and Bangladesh and between New Zealand and Bangladesh, which resulted in conspicuous success for the Bangladeshi team. And we felt no shame in that defeat. We were beaten tactically, we were beaten in batting, bowling and fielding, and we were beaten by a team that adapted to the difficult conditions much better than we did. Of course, we look forward to the possibility of a Bangladeshi-Australian final in the T20 World Cup, and I'm a patriot, so of course I'll support my own team, but I wouldn't be unhappy to see Bangladesh do well too. And I do believe, just as an aside, that there are probably one or two statues of Don Bradman around Australia too, possibly. I think there's one of Yvonne Goolagong as well. Anyway, today, somewhere between 40 and 60,000 Bangladeshi Australians are making an important contribution to society in their turn. And some of them, like Kishwar Chowdhury, the star of MasterChef Australia, are helping Australians to gain a better, more fully rounded understanding of Bangladesh and its rich culture. And more importantly, its outstanding achievements in development and improving the lives of its people, to the point where, as has been mentioned, it's now on the verge of graduating from least developed nation status. I look forward to helping Bangladeshis learn too more about Australia and about our culture, about interests and the things that make us tick, and the opportunities that exist for improving our relationship. And I think our relationship is really based on pretty solid foundations, as I think that history suggests, and it produces a really perfect platform on which we can build a more dynamic and vibrant relationship between our two countries, and I suppose a more contemporary one too. So if you ask me, what's my prognosis for the future of Bangladesh-Australia relations, I would say that the future is golden. On trade and investment, which I think I indicated earlier was one of the areas I'd like to touch on in a little bit more detail. You've mentioned already that in September, our Trade Minister, Dan Tian, and Bangladesh's Minister for Commerce, Tipu Munshi, met virtually to sign the Australia-Bangladesh Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, or the TIFA. And under the TIFA, we want to work energetically to enhance two-way trade and investment. Trade and investment, or rather trade in goods and services, I should say, has grown at a really quite remarkable and sustained rate over the past 10 years. And whilst it's not perhaps as high as we would like, it's still worth over $2 billion each year. And that is significant. And we trade with most countries in the world. So to be in the top 30, which we are with Bangladesh, is something that is worth recognising and worth being pleased about. But I think that we can do better. And at the moment, we have balanced imports and exports too, which is kind of nice. The garment sector, the agriculture sector, food and beverage and education services have been key drivers of the growth in our trade, and we see further opportunities to enhance trade and investment through bilateral cooperation in energy and minerals, including in renewable energy, in skills development, particularly as those skills needs develop as Bangladesh proceeds from least LDC status. And information and communication technology services. Education is important as well, and education institutions in Australia, including the two that you mentioned that I graduated from, are very well placed to work with Bangladeshi partners to address skills gaps in a range of professions. We'd like to see further growth in the number of Bangladeshi students in Australia. There were about 7,000 or so in 2019-20, but I think there's still scope for more students and young professionals to benefit from Australian education and training. And of course, that's been interrupted somewhat by COVID, but we look forward very much to welcoming international students back into our educational institutions in the nearest future in a safe and enjoyable environment when our borders are fully open again. We will, in the meantime, keep providing Australia Awards scholarships for master's degrees and for targeted short courses on priority topics like international trade and women in leadership, and others which we identify in consultation with the Bangladeshi government. Bangladesh is one of Australia's strongest agriculture markets in the region. Two-way agricultural trade alone in 2021 was $680 million. That's an increase of 33.7% from 2019-20, which is actually quite remarkable in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, where generally we saw a softening of economic activity and trade around the world. And chickpeas and wheat are Australia's largest exports here, and I believe that Bangladesh is in fact Australia's largest destination for chickpea exports. Bangladesh is also an important destination for Australian cotton, and opportunities exist, we think, to expand processed food and consumer goods exports too. In infrastructure, technology-driven solutions in fields such as road and rail management and logistics can support Bangladesh's ambitious infrastructure development program and plans. And I've seen some of those in action as I drive around Dhaka and as I've been just beginning to explore some of the wider country in the last week or two. And I think they're they're all of a part with Bangladesh's aspirations and its achievements in development over the last 20 years or so. We think we certainly have the potential to be a major supplier of LNG and other energy resources, including renewables, to fuel Bangladesh's growth and to satisfy the demand as Bangladesh develops further. And we'd welcome support for expanded commercial energy partnerships. We released our first low emissions technology statement under the Technology Investment Roadmap in September last year. We're very keen to cooperate with Bangladesh in that area, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. Australia welcomes foreign investment from many countries, and we'd welcome more investment from Bangladesh. With the right conditions, we think Australian investors would be very keen to explore opportunities here too. I personally am keen to increase investment in both directions, and I see that as being a very important part to the development of a more complete and comprehensive commercial relationship between our two countries. We've been witness to significant growth in trade, in buying and selling, in both goods and services over the last 10, 20 years or so, and I've mentioned that. But I think that the things that underpin that have some potential to grow further, and I would include investment as a very key part of that. We're hopeful that we'll be able to use the TIFA as a platform to examine and discuss what we can do to boost two-way investment. So I think we do have a shared interest in deepening and widening our trade and investment relationship and opportunities that exist in both of those areas. And I think that the prospects of our achieving that are quite bright. I want to turn now to a brief discussion of COVID-19. And we look forward under that TIFA to exploring how governments can work together to boost recovery of the private sector and to lead growth in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Australia's strengths can help complement Bangladesh's economic recovery from COVID-19 and contribute to sustained growth into the future. COVID has been a very difficult time for all of us, some more than others, and I know a number of people who've lost loved ones in the pandemic, both in Australia and here. And I'd like to take this opportunity to offer my sincere condolences to everybody who has been bereaved. We have supported Bangladesh's response to the COVID-19 pandemic by pivoting our development program to provide assistance to those in need. And under our COVID-19 development response plan for Bangladesh, our focus has been on protecting the gains that have been achieved previously through Bangladesh's own development and through the development program that we have delivered previously, as well as supporting Bangladesh's health security, its stability, and its economic recovery. And in May this year, in response to the most recent COVID-19 surge, our Foreign Minister, Senator Maurice Payne, announced an additional $5 million funding through the Red Crescent Society for the purchase of essential supplies, including oxygen and related equipment. And that was on top of the almost $6 million additional COVID-19 assistance provided last year. And that's in addition to the whole orientation of our program anyway, to sort of respond to those growing needs. We were also pleased to support the Bangladesh Armed Forces in their role as deliverers on the front line of the COVID-19 response through the provision of 5 tons of personal protective equipment, as we all know now, by the acronym PPE. And across the world, governments have had to make difficult choices about how to manage the health and livelihood consequences of this global pandemic. It's been a very difficult balance for all of us to strike. And I commend Bangladesh and its government for their skillful navigation of the crisis. I very much hope the worst is behind us. I'm reluctant to say it is. I think the pandemic has shown that it still can surprise us. But assuming and hoping that we are past the worst of it, I think there's no doubt that the pandemic has changed the way that we live and work, and that its impact may last for some time yet. And I think it'll be quite some time before we're able to understand fully what that impact has been. I think that the COVID crisis has also demonstrated more clearly than ever that in a very interconnected global world, we have no choice but to cooperate on global standards for the environment, for health, for trade, and for technology. And cooperation between governments will help Indo-Pacific countries recover from the pandemic and help them find new pathways to growth. And that reminds us of our shared interests in a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Bangladesh is a country with an international outlook and a strong, independent approach to its foreign policy. It's a major contribution to international peacekeeping efforts. It's a leader in climate change, and it's a strong partner in multilateral forums such as IORA and the United Nations. Bangladesh sits at the crossroads of Southeast Asia, South Asia, and North Asia. And in the Australian High Commission here in Dhaka, we often refer to Bangladesh as the 8th largest country in the world, not a small country by any means, and the gateway between ASEAN and the subcontinent. In a similar way, Australia also has a strong international outlook. Our country, a continent, is defined by the Pacific Ocean to the east and the Indian Ocean to the west. Our day starts with sunrise over the Pacific, and it ends when the sun sets over the Indian Ocean. So when we look at the rest of the world, it's largely through the prism of those two oceans. So today we find that the Indo-Pacific is at the heart of both global opportunity and of strategic competition. We have a commitment to a region that is defined by openness, a place where freedom of navigation in accordance with international law is a given, and where there's a thriving marketplace for the free flow of goods and people and of ideas. Australia has a commitment to an Indo-Pacific that is inclusive, that is a region in which many voices, perspectives, and players are respected. I hope that I'm sure we'll hear more about that as discussion proceeds this morning. I wanted now to turn to climate change. And as we know, and as I've suggested just recently in my previous remarks, global cooperation is really something that we need to have and to do successfully if we're to solve our shared problems. And of course, climate change is a major global issue at the moment. Australia, like Bangladesh, is on the front line of the effects of climate change, and we see the impact of it in Australia every day now. Australia is resolutely committed to the Paris Agreement, to taking practical and ambitious action to reduce emissions to keep within reach of the goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees and to reaching net zero as soon as possible and preferably by 2050. Our focus is on developing practical, scalable solutions that will enable Australia to reach net zero while partnering with other companies to decarbonise and to grow our economies. We are committed to protecting our unique biodiversity and the ecosystems that support our prosperity. We've joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, and we're committed to protecting 30% of land and of ocean by the year 2030. The prosperity of our region depends on Australia's remaining a stable and responsible energy partner of choice in the clean energy global economy. We want to help our partners achieve their commitments too by delivering at scale and at cost the clean energy solutions that we all need. Our plan, the long-term emissions reduction strategy, outlines how Australia will harness low emissions technologies to meet its zero commitments and to continue to supply reliable and clean energy. That plan is backed by the Australian government's investment of $20 billion in low emissions technologies in the decade to 2030. And during that same period, we expect to leverage a further $80 billion of total investment from the private sector to support commercialisation of the technologies that we need to bring emissions down in Australia and in the rest of the world. Our focus is on cost breakthroughs in clean hydrogen, long duration energy storage, carbon capture and storage, low carbon steel and aluminium, and soil carbon measurement. Removing the green premium, the price difference between current technologies and low emission solutions, is the key to widespread global adoption. And on top of all those things, we'll also drive a clean energy supply chain initiative for the Indo-Pacific region, and we'll consider making a sizable financial contribution to ensure that that delivers. So the relationship between Australia and Bangladesh is a really important one in our shared Indo-Pacific region. Bangladesh is full of energy, with a huge, young, aspirational population and an increasingly influential voice in our region and beyond. We share vital interests in the Indian Ocean, through and over which much of our international trade is conducted, and which people from both of our countries traverse when they visit their friends and relatives in each of our countries. Next year, as mentioned, we'll celebrate 50 years of bilateral relations, and I think there's a lot to celebrate in that. It'll be a great opportunity for us to reflect on how much we have to offer each other and how much we have to learn from each other. And it'll be a great opportunity to reflect on what we can do to meet the many challenges our countries and our shared Indo-Pacific region face. I believe the potential for us to work together to meet those challenges is enormous. And so, again, if you ask me for my prognosis for the future of Bangladesh-Australia relations, I say again that the future is golden. So thank you, Donald.
Thank you, High Commissioner. We are in total agreement with your prognosis, and thank you for giving us a wide description of Australia's engagement across this very wide spectrum, which also displays your interest in your responsibilities. So I would still maintain that the initial praise was very well deserved. So, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the floor one by one to all the distinguished discussants we have here today. I would assume that apart from making your remarks, you will also have questions for the High Commissioner, which and his response will form a part of the discussion component of this debate. And apart from you all, there may be one or two others wanting to ask questions. I have my phone open. They will come to me, and perhaps I'll give floor to one or two of them as well if we have the time. So with those, and also, might I tell you that I shan't be inviting, introducing the discussants. All of you have participated in our events before, and you are, even apart from all this, you're very well known in the community and even beyond. So I shall begin by asking Ambassador Shamsher Mobin Chaudhry to go first. And Shamsher, the floor is yours.
Good morning from Dhaka. I guess it's just past afternoon in Singapore. And Dr. Bhattacharya, thank you very much for giving me the floor and inviting me to this webinar this evening to discuss the state of bilateral relations between Bangladesh and a very good friend, Australia, and also perhaps prognosis for the future. Now, if I might start on a personal note, which is of course linked to my professional experience also. When I first joined the Bangladesh Foreign Office in January 1975, I was in the protocol division. And within a week of my joining the ministry, I was given charge to work for the visit of the then Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Gough Whitlam. So my career started with a visit by a very well-known Australian political personality and perhaps one of Australia's best remembered prime ministers, Mr. Whitlam. Being in the protocol, of course, my involvement in the substantive discussions were not part of it. It was basically to make the protocolary arrangements, but one couldn't escape overhearing some of the discussions taking place between then Prime Minister Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Australian Prime Minister and the delegations of the two, especially on the river cruise that followed. And then after the visit, when the Australian High Commissioner here, Philip Flood, shared some of the discussion that took place. It was indeed a very, very substantive visit. It was Cold War days, and this was perhaps the first visit by a very important player in the regional and the global sense. And Bangladesh's own foreign policy was still a work in progress, because we had not yet been recognized by major key countries like China, Saudi Arabia, and most of the Arab countries. So we were still looking out for friends who would be able to guide us, tell us what to do in a bipolar world, newly independent country that was still recovering from a devastation of a war. And one of the things that Prime Minister Gough Whitlam had suggested, and as it was shared to me by Philip Flood, is that Bangladesh should, the location of Bangladesh between South and Southeast Asia, which Jeremy mentioned in his remarks as well, it was like a coupling, between two key regions or parts of Asia, South Asia on one side and Southeast Asia on one side. Those days, I think we still call it the Indian subcontinent. And how can Bangladesh eventually find a place in there, other than strengthening our bilateral relations, which have grown over the years, which are stable, which are very strong. Australia is a major economic partner. Many Bangladeshi have made Australia their home. The chair of today's meeting itself has heightened his educational credentials by doing his PhD at the Australian National University in Canberra. So the links have been many, the links are still many, but that particular visit set the tone for the future course of Bangladesh-Australia relationship, which has since grown in depth and dimension. Over the years, of course, we have worked together on IORARC, and which initially took time to evolve, but then it is now almost a full-grown setup. And there was an IORARC meeting before Jeremy had arrived. Julia Libdet was still the High Commissioner here. So she was very active, and the high-level Australian delegation that was here, I think, led by your foreign minister, perhaps, if I remember right. And the Australia, of course, was a very, very visible partner, being a key member of IORARC. I looked at IORARC as taking Bangladesh beyond the bilateral plane of Bangladesh-Australia bilateral relationship, because here it was Bangladesh at one end and there was Australia at the other end. And IORARC has a very, very wide outreach. So over the years, Bangladesh has entered, its navy is now key, and we are now, I think we chaired one of the bodies of IORARC for a while. And since then, there has been kind of a think tank or a policy team is called BIMRAD, which is also linked with Australian technical assistance and consultations. So the links are many, and the links are varied. In the present, if we're looking at the present context before linking the present context with the future prognosis here, we have seen some recent development which within the greater Asian region and going all the way from the United States, passing through Europe and then ending up in Australia. And these have geostrategic importance for all the countries in between. And you understand, I'm talking of things like AUKUS and the Indo-Pacific theater. I wouldn't call it the Indo-Pacific strategy at this point of time.
It's okay.
This sends, signals to some others. So I would like to hear from other members in the panel as well as from the High Commissioner. How can Bangladesh and Australia work together so that Bangladesh's place in the Greater South, in the Asian theater, in a strategic way, finds a proper place? Because we have proven ourselves to be a very responsible neighbor and a regional player of consequence. That, I think, is one reason why Australia also was part of this great Dhaka dialogue that took place just before the COVID hit the world, where Australia and also Great Britain, the UK was also part of the process, although it was a think tank exercise between the ORF in India and the BISS in Bangladesh, and I was one of the speakers there. And it was backed by both the governments of India and the governments of Bangladesh. But the fact that the Australian High Commissioner and the British High Commissioner were also there showed that both these countries were also part of it. So I think the very stable and sound basis on which the Bangladesh-Australia relationship has built up over the last 50 years or so, it's time to see how we can look forward to a greater role for Bangladesh in the Asian region, where we can protect our own national interests, preserve them, at the same time keep our strategic relationship with other players in the region in a very stable position. I mean, kind of finding the right balance. And I think Australia, being the kind of policy it has maintained over the years, the kind of country that it is, can be a partner in helping moving this strategic relationship beyond just the bilateral frame. That would be my question and part of my presentation. I look forward to hearing from the rest of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Shamsher Chaudhry. You of course raise a very, very important issue. We have of course discussed bilateral relations a bit, and I'm sure that our discussants will have their views on this, and the High Commissioner also will respond in due course. Next on my list is Professor Deborah Bhattacharya, renowned scholar, diplomat, etc. Ambassador Deborah.
Honorable Chair, I'm everything other than a professor. Thank you very much for introducing me like that. Let me first thank the Cosmos Foundation for inviting me once again. I feel I am a veteran here, and want to compliment my good friend Inayatullah Khan for that. And it's always a pleasure to speak under your guidance, Excellency Bhattacharya Chaudhry. And I see the colleagues who are here are very much erudite and much more knowledgeable on this area. So with some humility, I speak today. I'm sorry, I have missed a part of the beginning of His Excellency's, the Australian High Commissioner's, High Commissioner Brewer's initial comments. I had been busy with that. I had distraction, you know, what things are happening in the country. I have to remain engaged with some of those issues. But I have got substantive part of it. I want to compliment and congratulate Excellency Jeremy Brewer for that very cogent and I think very constructive strategic approach he has laid out in front of us. As you all know that I try to stick to 3 points, and I will go into those. My first point is that a bit of a personal attachment to this issue. My first headline is that Australia had been always an enigma for me. This is my first headline. Why? From my childhood days when I studied the geography in the junior school, Tasmania, Hobart, the flora and fauna of Tasmania and the Great Barrier Reef and all kangaroos, everything really attracted me down the line. I was fascinated by the fact that the one country covers the whole continent. I was fascinated by the fact that almost 50%, that till the other day, of the population of Australia, at least one of their parents had been born overseas. And thereafter, you see the policies which we have seen. One policy which always, attracted me, how the indigenous people's issue had been resolved or addressed in Australia, and we have a lot to learn from that. But I must also say that I was also been enamored by the fact that I read when the Colin McLeod's The Thornbird, the television series Return to Eden, when it went further in my college days, I was very much a great lover of Bee Gees group, and also of course Kylie Minogue and all that. And currently the two most greatest actors in the world, Kate Blanchett and also the Nicole Kidman, are there from Australia. You know, that not as an economist, but as a person who has observed Australia, learned about Australia from the childhood, and that's why it's an enigma to me, and how it positions itself, and to say the least, that Australia was the first country among the OECDs to recognize Bangladesh, and as early as January 1972 open its mission over here. So when I visited New England, and the laid-back approach and the half-uttered sentences were always something which really fascinated me, the Australia per se. So that's my first point. Australia is an enigma to me. My second point today, I think I start my second point on that. Bangladesh-Australia relationship is a classical case of suboptimal utilization. It remains a very, very underutilized, underappreciated, understated, and also less understood relationship in the current context. Let me give you 3 or 4 points as an economist over here. Let us take the first case of the international development cooperation. You know, international development cooperation, the interesting fact is that although in the recent past, Australia has really has to contain its ODA flow. It's 0.2% of the GNI of Australian economy. But interestingly, the flow to Bangladesh has increased during that time. That is an important part. If you look at the numbers, so it was $44 million. Australia is incidentally a small donor. Anything around $50 million is a small donor, relatively, in quantity, but not quality. I will come to that. It went up to almost $59 million in the recent past, even notwithstanding the things what was happening in Canberra. This is very important. But it is, again, as I emphasize, it's not the quantity, but the quality which matters. Almost all of Australian money coming to Bangladesh, taxpayers' money, is in the grand form. That is the high quality which we need to recognize in these cases. And the sectors where they're coming in for human capital development, infrastructure, and other issues. So please note that the quality part of it is very critical. You know, in the recent past, Center for Global Development in Washington, D.C., where I am a non-resident fellow, has put out its most recent, what we call Development Friendliness Index, or more formally called Commitment to Development Index. And Australia came out amongst the first 5. It is the 4th country in the world which has the development friendliness commitment, or commitment to development. I can go on this for long, but that is the quality of the Australian aid to the developing countries, and the least developed countries in particular. One of the major part of it is the scholarship which the Australian government offers to Bangladesh. So the numbers have been going up significantly over the years, building capacity, the human resources base for the country, and we see the average of 7,000. The High Commissioner may correct me. What is the total number of that? But I hear from 1971 onward, more than 20,000 scholarship only at the master's levels were offered. The data will be an issue for me. I will come to that. So to say the least, the Australian Development Cooperation is a high quality development cooperation, not only in the Bangladesh context, but in the globally it has been assessed, and particularly from the point of view of technology transfer and human capacity development. Let me come on the trade issue. The trade issue is possibly where we see that although it's now almost $2.5 billion, $2 billion is goods, and then $500 million on services, and we have a marginal surplus on the trade. So we export more than we import. So we have a bit of an advantage over there with the Australian customers. So, but you look at the composition. So we are bringing in dairy products, agricultural products, minerals, and other things, and some sophisticated equipments. And we are exporting textiles and apparels mostly. But the agricultural product currently predominates. This is again another issue where we need more diversification and more possibly bringing in more inputs. We can talk about this, because in the future, when I come on my third point, I will highlight that how Australia fits in with the upcoming development ambition of Bangladesh. Third is the FDI. This is the most lamentable, I think, underutilized area of cooperation. FDI, if you look at the Australian investment, foreign direct investment, and if you see that it has never gone so much, it was in 2010, it was $14 million, which is paltry sum, and it came down to $2 million in 2020. And the biggest investor was the Santos, the gas and oil company. It was here for the last decade, but I see from media report that it is exiting from Bangladesh. It is selling out its shares to Singapore's Chris Oil or Chris Energy, and that is, I wonder what type of signal it is giving on that. I will come again on the energy part, that the post-coal economy which we are thinking of, and Australia being the biggest coal exporters in the world. And how do we get into the LNG, and how do we adjust to that? We will see to that. You must have read Brendan Augustine's article on double dose in this case, double dose booster in this case. So this is on that. My fourth point is remittance. If you look at the remittance figure, in the recent past, the growth of remittance flow, which had been very high in the recent past, unnaturally, which has come stabilizing possibly in the recent past. But the incremental part had been coming from the non-traditional. It is not Saudi Arabia, Middle East. It is coming from Europe. It is coming from Australia. It's coming from the Southeast Asia, South Korea. So if you look even in the COVID period, so if it was in 2019, it was almost $61 million. It became $142 million in 1920. So the remittance, we should fully appreciate the flow of remittances in terms of its contribution in strengthening private consumption, poverty alleviation, and inequality in many ways. So my basic point, if you look at these four areas, you will see how underperforming we are regarding the relationship between the Australia and Bangladesh relationship. I could have gone much more granular, but I think these are the four headline news which are given. Let me come to my third point. If Australia is an enigma to me, if it is a suboptimal relationship which we have, my third issue is that it is the next frontier. You all remember the Roddenberry quote, huh? The space is the final frontier. You remember, you must have seen the Star Wars films and things like that. I don't say that Australia is the final frontier, but definitely for Bangladesh, Australia is the next frontier. If Bangladesh in development ambitions are to be addressed, then Australia-Bangladesh relationship needs to proceed in a much more higher steam that it goes. I will come to it. The issue is that Australia-Bangladesh in last September, we have signed up the TIFA agreement, Trade Investment Framework Agreement, which is a great progress. But as you know, TIFA by itself does not ensure that flows will happen. It only provides a platform to discuss problems at certain points. So the modern approach to all these things is a comprehensive partnership agreement, SEPA. So how do you really take TIFA to SEPA? That would be one point, because the pathways, the pathways in terms of different sectors are yet to be worked out. And it is not only trade and investment, it is much more than that, human capital and other things I have mentioned. Let me conclude by saying that what are the Bangladesh development ambition in the coming days? The first and foremost is, of course, getting out of the LDC group. Now, again, I go back to the quality issue. The Australia back in early 2003, I think, gave us the duty-free, quota-free market access for their textiles and all other products, DFQF. So Bangladesh is coming out of the LDC group and would like to retain some of the privileges, even for a smooth and sustainable development in the post-LDC phase. The negotiation is going on in the WTO. Negotiation is going on in New York. How do you contain some kind of a breathing space over there? Australia can put in its political weight in favor of the graduating LDCs and provide the preferences, market preferences beyond these graduation in 2026, at least for 9 years, if not for 12 years, has been requested. The second point is that, of course, the delivery of the SDGs. As I have mentioned, the scholarship which Australia gives fits in very well with one of the targets of the SDG 17, providing scholarships to the developing countries, particularly to the least developed countries. So I can go on in other areas, including climate finance, how Australia can play a very significant role in SDG implementations in Bangladesh. This is the second development ambitions. The third ambition, as you know, that to move into the high middle income group by 2041. This will be driven by investment by FDI, and Australia is definitely in a place to do that. The LNG business is only one part of it. The issue of the high sophisticated IT-based services is the other area of it, and their human capital development is the other areas of it. We can go on that. We need a pathway of foreign direct investment coming from Australia over here. And the third and fourth area where Australia can play a role is in the case of the impending fourth industrial revolution. Fourth industrial revolution, it is already touching our shores, not only in the textiles and garment sectors, but also in other areas. Australia has all the potential to support skill development, technology transfer, access to know-how in the coming challenge to meet the challenges of fourth industrial revolution in coming days. Let me conclude by saying, why are all these things not happening? Is it a market failure? Is it because of the intelligence failure? Is it the image of Bangladesh which is holding back? Is it the reticence of the Australian investors not to see beyond Southeast Asia? Also, this is something we need to address. This is beyond my competence as an economist. But this much I know, that we need more data, more research, and we need to work out a pathways how Australia-Bangladesh relationship will prosper in line with our development ambition and in line with all the commitment with which Australia came to us in 1971. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to talk. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you, Deborah, Priya, for that excellent presentation on this, what you call the suboptimal utilization of our potentials. A very quick question for you, though. I mean, you mentioned towards the end of your remarks that it's a challenge would be to transfer TIFA to SEPA. The question is it possible for a developing country or at the stage of development of Bangladesh to conclude a SEPA with a developed country like Australia? Or need it be, say, sector-oriented or aimed at low-hanging fruits? Because that kind of thing would also apply to Bangladesh-Singapore relationship. So could you just take a minute to explain that, your views on that?
That's a very good point, Excellency. The point is, when we do SEPA, it is not based on existing realities. We do SEPA on the basis of potential possibilities. So in that way, it is also about carving out the comparative advantage area analysis, whether it is energy, whether it is the market access issue or the investment issue, or it is technology transfer issue. These specific areas with working groups has to be done. Now, if you look at TIFA, so TIFA has created a working group. The working group is supposed to meet or something like that. I don't know. I have most up-to-date information on that. They are the one who are supposed to work out whether they feel institutional, some kind of a limitations within TIFA to exploit all the potentials on these cases. But the fact remains, in the future, development finance, FDI, and market access, and technologies, and human development will be all into will be the one which can give proper treatment to that. And my concluding line is that why I think it is possible now than any time before. My strategist friends will speak elsewhere, but let me tell the Quad approach, the approach, or the Indian Rim approach. So Indo-Pacific stability and sustainability approach of Australia would fit in very well in terms of investing in Bangladesh and South Asia, and possibly hold the key to many of the global stability and security issues over here. So I do see what I have just mentioned, the approach in our development ambitions are very much aligned with the political strategic approach which Australia wants to perform. And obviously this too will, as Shamsher Mobin Chaudhary has said, take beyond bilateral. And this is global, which will feed into the global strategy. I think this demands data and a much more, and to conclude, and if you give me one question, I will answer three again. So the issue is that if you look at one of the weakest points of Australia-Bangladesh relationship is the lack of partnership with the non-government organization. So if you look at goal number 17, where SDGs, where it has been asked the governments to do private-public partnership and also with think tanks and academia. Tell me how many Australian great scholars are known in Bangladesh, or how much in that, notwithstanding the fact we have this kind of relationship on academic collaboration. So I insist that in the future, in this strategy, the relationship between non-state actors, the partnership has to be also strengthened to bring in more knowledge and analysis and transparency into the case. Thank you very much. Don't ask me any more questions.
Thank you. Deborah, your point well taken. Okay, next on my list is Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, also another alumni of Australian National University. Imtiaz, floor is yours.
Thank you, Iftikhar Bhai. And thank you, Cosmos, for giving me the opportunity. And good to see you, Your Excellency, Jeremy Bear. I think you made a good ending when you said future is golden. And what I would try to focus on is mainly how and what are the areas where it can actually become golden. I'll flag 5 areas, unlike Deborah he's more into triadic formulation, but I'll go into 5 very small points. After all, the Panchashil is older than the triadic formulation. But anyway, let's start with the serious problem that the world now has is the pandemic. If you look at some of the data, even yesterday's data, I was looking into UK, USA, even India. It looks like that the third wave for us will come. I don't think we can stop that. UK infection was as high as 49,000 plus yesterday, with 180 deaths. United States infection was 82,000 plus yesterday, with 1,633 deaths yesterday. India relatively small, but still getting up, 16,000 plus. So if you look at those figures, you can easily see that another wave is coming. Now, what is making a difference, and UK is a good example for that, is the number of deaths is lower. If you have 49,000 infection in UK, but 180 deaths. And that is where I think Australia can come in, because I don't think Bangladesh or even India can stop. For us, it will be the third wave. I think it will come today or tomorrow. But what can make a difference is vaccination. Now, Australia is also, COVID-19 vaccine producer, particularly AstraZeneca. And I think we haven't received any as yet, but I guess that's one area where Australia can be more open and can help us, because the quicker the people are vaccinated in Bangladesh, the quicker or the better would be, I think, the way we can contain the third wave. That's my argument. This is not going to go up, and it's related to political economy. Vaccine is not only health issue, it's the issue of livelihood and economy. So that's one area I would request the High Commissioner to work on. The second one, and it's related to the first one also, if you look at Bangladesh-Australia relationship, the promise lies with the diaspora actually. We have a very rising diaspora in Australia. It's 60,000 plus. But more importantly, we have more than 1,000 doctors. That I think is very important. Plus 1,000 doctors is huge. Australia literally got all these doctors free. In fact, they did not invest in our medical education as yet. And I think the doctors are playing an important role. I mean, the Bangladeshi doctors in Australia. I know a couple of them. I remember last time when I visited Brisbane, I met, my God, more than 100 or so. I was quite amazed. I think it's important to look into this diaspora, how that diaspora can actually now help Bangladesh, link the Bangladeshi Australian diaspora with the Bangladesh development and the promises that we have. This is a workable issue. And on the issue of medical doctors, I think it's time that Australia can invest in our health sector, particularly in building hospitals, given that the technology development they have on the health, and link these Bangladeshi doctors with them, because they would love to help their villages, love to help their own country, and they do. In fact, they have interactions, but it's not institutionalized. So it would be nice to go out of Bangladesh to have some hospitals built on joint collaboration between Bangladesh and Australia, maybe with the diaspora in the middle. That's the idea. So I think this is a rising diaspora, and it's going to increase further. Let's utilize them in a way so that in future our relationship between Australia and Bangladesh becomes a deeper one. The third one is, of course, our second serious problem is the Rohingya issue. I understand Australia is helping on the humanitarian issues, have made several times commitment, but I guess further pressure on Myanmar is required. And it's important that Australia decouples the Rohingya issue from the national interest that Australia has with Myanmar. I see Australia coming up very strongly after Aung San Suu Kyi got displaced, even putting some sanctions and all. But I think it's important that they become more visible on the issue of Rohingya. Even with the Gambia move with ICJ, we see Canada and Netherlands. But it would be, I think, very important if Australia can openly come up and support particularly the issue that we have, that the Rohingyas have on the ICJ. That will give a signal to Myanmar that this thing is not going to go away. So I would request, and in Australia, we have around, well, more than 3,000 Rohingya actually. They live in Australia. They work on the issue of Rohingya emancipation. So it would be interesting to use them. Twice, a former speaker of Australia came to Bangladesh to speak on the Rohingya issue. I think it's important to institutionalize that so that Myanmar government gets a signal. The fourth issue, and this was raised by Deborah a little bit, Bangladeshis know very little about the indigenous population. We are not so much aware. And I say this because, as I said, I was a student in Australia. I studied there. From that, if I look back and even now, I think we need to do something on that. And one way I was thinking that whether Australian government can introduce some fellowship for indigenous Australians to come to Bangladesh and speak around their issues, because people know so little and they have all the negative understanding about the indigenous population of Australia. Almost, I would imagine 20 years, whatever knowledge they have is 20 years old or even beyond that. So it would be nice to have in that fellowship some Aboriginal poets or painters, the fascinating painters they have, to come to Bangladesh and work. And Cosmos would be an ideal place when it comes to painting. So I think these are the certain things that can easily be done. And the final one and the last one, and this also was raised by Deborah a little bit, but let me, I think it should come to the discussion, is the issue of the Quad and the Triad. Whether now we have the Triad more important than the Quad or not. If you look at this transformation, and I see a little bit of transformation, I don't think post-pandemic Quad is applicable. I don't think India would be excited given the tense relationship on the pandemic issue with the United States they had is not something that probably Indian bureaucracy would forget, or the policymakers. So I don't see a future of Quad so much. But if you look at Triad, in fact, what happened is you singled out the Asian powers out of Triad. You know, Japan is not there, India is not there. So Australia ends up literally not being an Asian country once again. That's the problem. And it will be a problem in the future for Australia itself, given the kind of diaspora you are having or will have in the future. I think there will be resistance. Talking to some of my friends in Australia, I could see that it will be an issue in the future. So I was just thinking, I was flagging this so that we can have maybe a separate discussion Cosmos can organize. But I think it's important to see Australia in the context of an Asian country, and then we are more comfortable with that. The moment Australia makes a relationship, particularly with the United States, which is not a reliable friend, I have to say, you know, they have abandoned lot of friends, old friends, and the last one they have abandoned was the Kabul regime. And the way they abandoned is quite pathetic. So I speak here as an IR person. I think for Australia to come up in the future, because you talk about the golden future, it needs to show more of its Asianness and not the Westernization that we see when we look at Triad. So these are the 5 areas that I thought to flag today. But thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imtiaz. All points very well put across. High Commissioner, you'll realize that when an ambassador comes on a bilateral posting, the ambassador might believe that it's only bilateral relationship that concern him or her. One realizes that in an interconnected world, we are confronted with many other issues which are quite beyond the realm of what we initially assumed that we are responsible for. Okay, our next speaker would be Brigadier General Shahidul Anam Khan, ex-army, of course, peacekeeper, newspaper person, editor, journalist, analyst, Anam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chaudhary. Thanks to Cosmos Foundation and Mr. Inayatullah Khan for asking me to share this platform, this forum with such erudite and well-known scholars and reputed personalities. I have been asked to speak on AUKUS, which Imtiaz referred to as the trial. And I'll take up on the chairman's suggestion, perhaps that instead of giving my comments, I'll posit some questions to the ambassador for him to answer, because I believe my questions would reflect generally the questions that are engendered in the minds in the minds of the scholars and observers of international relations. But let me first start with a brief background of AUKUS, because I believe there is too much of raucous regarding AUKUS, in spite of the fact that perhaps this is the most significant security partnership, not only of this decade, but I think perhaps the most significant since 4th of April 1949, has such a defense treaty created such a splash or such furor around the globe. Admittedly and understandably, it has received mixed reaction. France has felt very hard done by, who won't, with $60 billion of orders scuttled. And it is much more than a stab in the back. I think, as true to what Oscar Wilde said, true friends never stab you from the back, they stab you from the front. I think France might feel that they've been stabbed in the front as well. But the common refrain is what happens to the Quad? Is it being sidelined? And I repeat what Imtiaz said. Where is Asia in all this new dispensation? But if people are surprised at a new treaty being signed by these three big powers, I was not, because I saw it coming. If you read the fine prints of the DoD, Department of Defense paper, US Department of Defense paper on Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific, you will find that this was only a matter of time. Since Quad could not be transformed into exclusively military or exclusively defense-oriented pact, I believe AUKUS was the only alternative. I read one or two of these points that were made in the paper. It said in the preamble of the paper, it said achieving peace through strength. Now whoever has achieved peace through strength, I don't know. And for that, you need a joint force which will provide effective deterrence, and therefore a need for a network security architecture. That was the preamble of the DoD paper on Indo-Pacific, published on the 1st of 2019. So AUKUS is a defense pact. There is no secret. I mean, it is very clear. The fact is that Australia will become the seventh nation, only the seventh nation in the world to possess a nuclear submarine without being a nuclear power. All the others are nuclear powers. Australia is not. And the first time that the US will be sharing its nuclear technology or submarine technology with a third country after 1954. That is, after it shared with the UK. Of course, there is also the artificial intelligence and quantum technology that we share, but that is something more technical. And of course, investment in submarine is the obvious thing to do, isn't it? Because submarine gives you more flexibility, it gives you more endurance. But the question is, what will you do with a platform that carries only conventional weapons, but powered by nuclear power? I mean, yes, of course, it will give endurance, but there's a risk when you are carrying a nuclear reactor in a submarine, which is mobile, which is moving. So I think it carries some risk. The three countries have sort of argued that they had compulsions to go for a defense pact because of China. And China's navy was growing leaps and bounds, admittedly so. But I think I would ask positive to the High Commissioner, aren't you really sort of hyping up the Chinese naval capability? I mean, you're talking only in terms of numbers. Yes, as of today, number of men of war that China possesses outnumbers that which US possesses in number only, but not in tracking capability.
Is it ships and submarines included?
Everything. I'm talking about men of war. It's okay. Men of war means all sorts of vessels that floats over the surface, under the surface. So as of 2020 December, China had 350 vessels, crafts, submarines, and US had 297. But that's only a number. But remember, US has 9,000 armed ballistic missile that they can throw at various 9,000 different targets. China has only one. So I'm talking about relatively in terms of the strike capability and the capability to do damage. Now, you were talking about China preventing free movement. Can I ask, Ambassador, has there been any activity on the part of China that would resemble an area denial activity that would seem that China is trying to prevent others from using this area or the shipping zones or shipping lanes freely without let or hindrance? Has there been any? I'm not aware of that. I'm asking you because your position seems to me like one between Alexander the Great and a pirate. I remember of an instance reading somewhere where Alexander encountered a pirate, a small pirate with a few ships, and asked him, "Why are you troubling the waters?" So the pirate said that I am moving about with only 2 or 3 ships, but you are traveling the entire world. So you are an emperor, and I am a pirate. The fact is that the domination is still US dominates, still the Western powers dominate in the Pacific, the Asia Pacific. So therefore, I believe that Chinese threat at this point of time has been overly exaggerated. Of course, Australia had its own compulsions. I will give that to Australia because it was under tremendous diplomatic pressure. As I said, it was under military pressure, but as I said, it was overhyped. But the Australian requirement also sort of mixed and matched with the US's sort of overall policy of keeping its military-industrial complex alive. Now look at the development of events since 1945. After every big war, after every big involvement, most of which resulted in disaster for America, a new threat was seen, a new threat was discovered, or a new threat was sort of painted against which people had to be arrayed, allies had to be brought together. And I dare say that it has more to do with the American military industrial complex than, I'm not discounting the strategic requirement, but the objective to keep the military industrial complex alive was predominant. Because this part of the industry is estimated to account for more than 60% of the of the total US manufacturing industry. So therefore, this aspect perhaps needs also to be addressed. What are the implications? And this I put to the ambassador. Don't you think this will lead to arms race? Don't you think that that will be overtaken by what is known in the IR parlance as security fallacy or security dilemma? When people, when countries then scamper to add to their arsenal, China has already tested its hypersonic rockets, and others will follow soon. So I think this will sort of start a cycle of arms proliferation. And what happens when there is a licit proliferation of arms is that there is a good chance of many of these legal weapons finding its way into the illegal market. So there will be proliferation of illegal weapons also. So I think overall, this particular, it's too early to say or to predict the outcomes, but I think there is going to be arms race in this region. Moreover, the pact has not been well taken by the ASEAN countries either. There is mixed reaction. Malaysia and Indonesia has opposed openly this pact on the same grounds that it would sort of change the character of ASEAN as the zone of peace, of freedom and neutrality, and a non-nuclear zone of peace and freedom and neutrality. So therefore, I think this is fraught with some sort of uncertainty, some sort of danger. India feels ditched, I think, as much as Japan. Although overtly India is saying that this will act as a shield against Chinese enlarged footprint in this region, but nonetheless, I think India will also feel hard done by. I fear that also there is perhaps what Graham Allison has alluded to as the Thucydides trap, whether or not there is a chance of China and America coming into conflict because, draw a parallel to Athens and Sparta and what happened eventuated for 21 years of an emerging power and an existing power. And that's something scenario playing out in this area. And I was wondering whether or not Australia, in this case, will be the one to sort of beat the war drums on behalf of the United States, because the United States may not be willing to openly get into hostility with China. So on this, I hope not a very dismal note, let me end by saying that these are very interesting developments with Quad on one side and with AUKUS on one side. The apprehensions are justified, perhaps, and perhaps the High Commissioner may care to answer some of the questions that I raised in his reaction to what we have said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anam, for raising those very interesting points. So, okay, we will now move on to the next speaker, the last on my list, but of course not the least, Ambassador Tariq Karim, veteran diplomat analyst, of course.
First of all, my thanks to Cosmos and both to Inayatullah Khan and to IFTI as its president for inviting me to this panel. It's always a pleasure being a part of these dialogues. Being the last on the queue and by preference, I have the task not just of being able to respond to many of the points raised, and it has been a fully covered session. I think it's been a very fulsome conversation with lots of points. And as IFTI said, High Commissioner Brewer will have much to think about. And perhaps many of the comments will raise questions in his own mind about where the future of Bangladesh, Australia should be going. I will make basically 7 points, of which one of them have a couple of subsets, and I'll try to be as brief as possible within the time allotted. My own dealings with Australia in the bilateral sphere started in the early 70s, soon after I joined the ministry, and in the personnel department, it was a challenge, both in terms of getting new persons in at the junior level and arranging the training. So when I was director personnel in 1973, I was looking around for where I could send our new recruits going to come in within a year or two for training abroad, as we didn't have the facilities ourselves. And there was a wariness about sending them to any country. And Australia came forward. And so among our first batch of trainees going out were some to Australia. And I'm glad to see that has continued. Maybe, I'm not aware whether it's continuing steadily or whether it's going in spurts. But certainly it helped our young diplomats to broaden their horizon, to hone their trade skills, and to be effective contributors to the Bangladesh's foreign policy execution. The second point, I'll come to this, cut to the chase right in the beginning, is the point raised last by High Commissioner Brewer about climate change. And, strangely, perhaps, but not ironically, Bangladesh and Australia are in the same boat in facing this global challenge. It's almost like a universal challenge. And this has not happened just in 10 years or 20 years or 100 years. What we are facing today is the result of our actions, of our acts of omission and commission over several centuries. But the problem is, once the problem is upon us, it has us in its grip. It will not go away within 5 years or 10 years, as we are even now contemplating within the COP, or 50 years. It will take maybe another couple of centuries. It will mean the passing of several generations. And I think we need to shift our way of thinking from reactive thinking, action, to proactive and anticipatory thinking. And I don't see anywhere in the world we are making that transition in our thinking and strategizing process. Life and my experiences have taught me to become a fairly firm adherent to the Homer-Dixon thesis that environmental change or environmental degradation in combination with resource depletion will very likely lead to human conflicts. The human conflicts may be internal at first, but they will never remain internalized. And this is a process that we are seeing ourselves in our own region, in the subcontinent, and in the neighboring region. I think the days are gone when one country could freely attack another country. Westphalia put a stop to it, and we are the children and grandchildren of the Westphalian order that emerged after 1945. What will happen is internal instability, destabilization, rise of non-state actors, and they will spill over. We do not live in isolation. No country lives in isolation. So right now, Bangladesh has in its immediate neighborhood in the east, Myanmar, that was raised by several speakers, and the Rohingya issue. Now we have to our west, 2 stages removed, Afghanistan. And Afghanistan has a more direct impact on us because it's an Islamic country. There are shades of Islam there, which would find appeal in Islamic countries elsewhere, and not just Bangladesh. It could, you can destroy the infrastructure of a radical organization. How do you destroy the idea? That is more important, and I don't think enough emphasis has been given. I think the US's biggest problem was it set out to destroy the infrastructure of the ISIS and the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda. It could not destroy the problem. It actually fed the idea. And in a sense, if people wonder why did the Afghan army armed to the teeth by the US simply just vanish, I think the idea is there. I mean, it's their own army. Are they going to fight willy-nilly, except for in tribal conflicts with each other? I've seen the same phenomenon in Iran. So, however, this is something which we need to change. And I think the more climate degradation we see, the more risk of threats, non-traditional security threats occurring are likely to occur. And this could be in the next 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. But it will occur unless we start addressing it now. We are seeing the gradual vanishing of our own very small patch of the coral reefs of St. Martin's Island. Australia has already familiar with the dangers that its great coral reef faces. And that has not happened suddenly. Scientists understand now that it's been the end of a chain reaction that has been taking place for quite a long time. If the coral reefs disappear, it's going to affect the ecology, the ecosystem of the marine hemisphere that is basically the larger portion of this planet. And if that happens, dependent societies, dependent agricultural patterns, everything is going to change. So we need to address that as quickly as possible, and we need to have a coherent and anticipatory policies and actions towards these dangers. Then I come to how do we do that? We have to make certain transitions in our policies and in our actions. One of the biggest causes that has, I think, in my own mind, certainly, maybe some of you share it, maybe some of you don't, is anthropogenic caused changes. One of the biggest is our own industrial revolution depended so much on fossil fuels, powering the engine of growth and economies every part of the world. And Bangladesh, like quite a few other countries, China was until recently, hugely coal dependent. And this is mostly untreated coal. And the more fuel, the more demand for power rises, the more coal-powered power plants will come in because they are cheap and they are quick. We need to make a transition. And the transition to dirty energy, from dirty energy to clean energy, will not happen overnight. I recognize that. You cannot just suddenly say we will have a clean energy policy, I will shut down my coal plants. If we were to do that in Bangladesh, our economic activity would cease abruptly. And we would start sliding back from being the talk of the world to being once again the talk of the world in a negative sense. We have to make a transition. In a sense, Australia can help us, but I'm disappointed that Australia is not in the picture. Australia, I was reading in one report written by an Australian author, Brendan Augustine, I think his name was, is the largest repository of natural gas, I think even more than Qatar, or perhaps equaling Qatar's. But we are importing LNG now from sources other than Australia. What can Australia do to come and fill up our efforts at transitioning? How can they help us transition from dirty power plants to cleaner power plants and ultimately to absolutely clean, where we even phase away LNG and go into renewable clean energy? Without that, without fuel, the engines of growth everywhere will stop running. We have to find the new fuel. We are, of course, diverting to cleaner sources. We have fallen back on nuclear energy. It's been a long cherished dream. And now the Prime Minister is talking of a second plant. But personally, between us, I'm a little sherry. Nuclear energy also requires you to have a very disciplined approach to how you treat this subject, because this boon can easily become a disaster. If there are 100 checkpoints on a protocol of ensuring security, be sure that there will be 102nd and 103rd that we have not thought of. The Fukushima disaster happened not because the Japanese did not anticipate, but the anticipation were outpaced by the dimensions or the vastness of the climate change, which raised the tidal bores above 8 meters. They had calculated, according to history, that no tidal bore would be above 8 meters. Well, it reached 8.5, 9 meters, and so it was flooded and they could do nothing about it. The plant just collapsed. So these are points, I think, help us in these areas. Number 5, I would go into the area of skill development. You have mentioned that yourself. Australia has been involved. I think what is necessary is now to have a strategic plan of how you are going to develop the skill. And here I'll bring in another facet to it. I mean, education exchange programs. I think this Deborah mentioned it, or Imtiaz mentioned it. Excellent idea. There is not enough awareness about Bangladesh and its potentials, except in the academic world and perhaps in the world of practitioners, but not among the common people. We need to break the hangovers that's in the common mind. The common mind doesn't go very deeply into a lot of history and geography, but they deal with what affects them. How do we change that thinking to see, okay, if we help Bangladesh or get to know Bangladesh better, or have more Bangladeshis participating in the Australian development, these are the benefits that will accrue to us. In the process, it will also accrue to Bangladesh. Now, I have always looked on Australia and Canada as the countries that were left out from giving the United States a good run for the money. You have the size, both of you have the size, and particularly Australia. Canada has the disadvantage of very extreme, inhospitable climate zones. Australia does not. Yes, you have deserts, but deserts one can face. It's ice that's more difficult to face. And you have the mineral resources. What you do not have is something that the United States also did not have to begin with: the depth in terms of population. The United States overcame that with a very enlightened and expansive immigration policy. And the immigrants in the United States actually turned out to be the drivers of the engine of growth and technological advancement of the United States. Wherever Bangladeshis have gone, they have contributed to the growth technologically, not just manual labor of all those countries. And this was mentioned also earlier, that we have a very rich bank of diaspora. Now, we can have a program where Australian Bangladesh and Australian Australians can come to Bangladesh and share that knowledge through an exchange program. They may not want to re-emigrate back to Bangladesh, but they would certainly be very happy to come in under such program. Similarly, you will need skills, a vast array of skills to develop the fallow land in the vast Australian continent, to make it really rise up as a major Asian power. And that Asian power that would be your best guarantee about your fears against China than actually taking on China in military terms on the land and air and the ocean. I think that is something, it's a long-term plan. I agree with what Shahidul Anam said, that yes, China has huge arsenal of men of war, but they lack the weaponry to match the United States. But then you ask, if United States has X thousands of nuclear missiles on board its men of war, is it going to be the first and only power to use nuclear weapons in a war like it did in Second World War? I'm not so sure, because even if one weapon can reach the United States, it's a disaster for the United States. So there is that mad paradigm to it, which will prevent both. I mean, I take with a little bit of skepticism the fear being rattled about that US and China are going into direct conflict, or India and China are going to direct conflict. Yes, there will be a lot of shadow boxing, as indeed there is between countries negotiating with each other. However, look at the investments that India and China and India and the US have in each other. Look at the trade that is there. They are almost in the top 3 of being the trading partners with each other, as well as the investment partners. A lot of American industries will collapse if relations with China and the United States will go to war tomorrow. So I hope it will never break out into a shooting war, but you can never rule out the stupidity of people. That can happen. Some of the wars broke out simply because of miscalculation in the brinkmanship that we're engaged in. The area, so skill development is one major area, 2 other areas, and then I'll finish. Second area is, it was mentioned by several speakers, COVID. And I agree totally with Imtiaz in my forebodings that the third wave is lurking around the corner. We don't know in what form and in which manner it will strike us, but it will strike us. We are India locked. If any part of India happens to have a third wave, it will come to us through a process of osmosis. China itself, I read day before yesterday, in certain parts of China, they are already now having to shut down movement of people and movement of flights because they have a third wave happening. So this virus is unknown to man in his fight against different microorganisms. And it's partly, I would lay the blame squarely on the fact that we have forgotten something, a concept called ecological integrity. We have become so used to thinking in the Westphalian paradigm and the subsets of the Westphalian paradigm that we have now even partitioned our minds. And we cannot think holistically. There are so many things involved with one, like the species in the ocean. We're talking of harvesting $3 trillion from the blue economy of the Bay of Bengal. But if one species, keystone species in the Bay of Bengal disappears because of the 60,000 square kilometers of dead zone we have, or the plastic accumulation, marine plastic accumulation over the next 50 years, then it's not just one species that will disappear. There'll be a host of species, and Inayat knows that very well, having brought out a book on the Bay of Bengal himself. So these are all points, I think, where we have Australia and Bangladesh has worked closely in building the platform of relationship between two of us bilaterally. We now to graduate this, give it more depth, and use the next 50 years for consolidation. We need to translate the steady growth into an extraordinary growth if possible. But here, of course, each country, every country thinks of its own national interest. To think about it in terms of your own national interest and where it will take you. And of course, the bottom line in every question you'll ask is this of any benefit to me? If you think about it holistically, I think you will find that it is as much beneficial to you as it will be to us. There, I read just day before yesterday an analysis published, I think, in the New York Times or one of the papers, that climate change is likely to increase the likelihood of non-traditional security threats happening everywhere. And that includes the Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal. Now, we are the vice chair of the IORA, and we will be taking up the chairmanship at the end of the year. I remember in the late 80s, mid-80s through late 80s, South Africa, Australia, India, and Bangladesh took a leading role in the formation of the IORA. I was High Commissioner to South Africa when one of the first meetings was held. But then IORA is a vast universe by itself. There are conflicting interests among regions and between partners in the IORA. I would approach cooperation within the IORA in the same basis that I have approached regional cooperation in my own troubled region. The whole of SAARC has never shown inclination of going anywhere in one direction, and so it didn't go in any direction. We chose sub-regional cooperation. Maybe there are units within the SAARC which can move, and at least that appears to be happening. Again, change is slow, but I am convinced that change will happen. It requires patience and perseverance. Within IORA, I would focus, Indian Ocean definitely, but I would focus, we need to have a governance structure not only for the Indian Ocean, within the overall paradigm of the UNCLOS, but more specific to needs of the Indian Ocean. And I would start with getting such a governance structure for the Bay of Bengal first. And if we can demonstrate something is possible, it will affect the rest of the IORA region. Maybe others will say, okay, we need to have something for the Arabian Sea region, or we need to have something for this part of the Indian Ocean. And I think this is something on which Australians and Bangladeshis can work closely within the IORA. What sort of governance framework do we adopt? What are the rules? You mentioned free and fair shipping and open shipping. Yes, but you need to also look into the ecological and environmental degradation taking place within the oceanic sphere. I mentioned 2 points within Bay of Bengal. I don't know whether there are similar points elsewhere in the Indian Ocean region. Perhaps you may be touched by some. Why is the coral reef degradation happening? So we need to think about all this being interconnected, how one will spill over into the other. And with that, I'll close my rambling remarks. Thank you, Ifti.
Thank you, Tariq. It wasn't rambling at all. And thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. Obviously, I mean, Ambassador Karim, by the way, was the last of the discussants. So we have concluded this phase of the webinar. What I'll do now is I'll open that up to questions. I only have one question. I mean, Masood Khan, he's Deputy Managing Director of Cosmos Foundation. He won't make an intervention, but merely ask a question. After which I'll give the floor back to High Commissioner Brewer for 5-10 minutes, whatever, not necessarily to respond to every question asked, to every point raised, but to give a comprehensive reaction to the totality of the discussions that were brought to the table today.
Thank you. A good day to all. Excellency, it was a pleasure to meet with you recently and look forward to furthering our discussion. My question is that there is a rising concern worldwide and also in the region on climate change. We understand Prime Minister Scott Morrison will be in Glasgow for the COP event. Do you have any information for us about Australia's current position on the issue? Also, is there any scope for cooperation between Bangladesh and Australia on the subject? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Really fascinating set of discussions and an enormous amount of material to try and cover. I don't know if I'll get to every single point that people raised, but I'll try and touch on at least some of them. I suppose the first thing to say is that we talk a lot about our Indo-Pacific strategy in Australia and in other parts of the world now increasingly. And as I mentioned, Australia is bracketed, if you like, by the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean on each side of our continent. So our perspective on the world is naturally one that takes account of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and the environment that we look in and exist in is the Indo-Pacific. So it's the perspective that we take, and we regard it as a very natural way for us to look at the world. And we have a vision of an Indo-Pacific that is open and inclusive and resilient, and which is underpinned by norms, rules, and respect for sovereignty. And our national interests and economic recovery from COVID, our broader economic welfare, our security are very much tied to the stability and the prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region. So it's our neighbourhood, and we want it to be prosperous and secure. And our vision is based on a number of principles, and those principles have underpinned decades of stability and increasing prosperity. And they are openness, including open and secure markets that facilitate the flow of goods and people, inclusiveness, which, as I mentioned in my initial remarks, allows a whole range of voices and perspectives and players to be heard, resilience, and that would include threats such as climate change, or two threats such as climate change and natural disasters, and also to coercion. And based on rules and norms and international law, where the rights and sovereignty of all countries are respected. And we do recognise that some of the challenges to these ideas are growing. We see that rules and norms and institutions are under some pressure. There are tensions over territorial claims in some parts of the region. Cyber attacks are becoming more frequent, and there are a whole range of other things going on, including protectionism and coercion. So, I mean, that's the sort of basis of our Indo-Pacific strategy, if you like, and it's something that we talk about quite often. Other countries have Indo-Pacific strategies. They don't necessarily mean exactly the same thing as what we mean, but that's what we mean. As far as Australia in the region is concerned, I mean, Australia is in the Indo-Pacific region. We are part of it. We're near the centre of it, at least that's our perspective of it. Most countries, I suppose, see themselves as the centre of their perspectives. And we regard ourselves as an active and constructive player, and we want to continue to be an active and constructive player in our region. And we want to work with countries that have similar aspirations to us for a secure and prosperous region to help that vision be realised. And obviously Bangladesh is an important part of that, an important country in the region, an increasingly important country in the region, and one that we will be looking for all kinds of opportunities to cooperate with. Australia is very much conscious of its, I suppose, Asian location, if you like, and we are a very constructive contributor, we think, to and have very strong relationships with the Asian countries in our region. We are a country which has a larger and larger Asian population, if I can call it that, every day. Six of our largest 10, I think, immigration sources are from Asia, and our population of people with an Asian background, I think, is now approaching 3 million. So I don't have the exact figures there, but I think that's a reasonable approximation. And you only have to walk down a street in Australia to know that it's a very multicultural nation. And we think that we're one of the most successful multicultural nations in the world. Immigration is essential and has been essential to our nation building almost since we first began as a nation, and certainly since European settlement. And that has accelerated in the years since the end of World War II. We have a universal immigration policy. We accept people from every country in the world. Over 200 different languages are spoken in Australia, and something like 30% of our population was born overseas. So immigration is not just an essential part of the nation building, it's almost a fundamental plank of our very being. We have heard a fair bit about AUKUS, and I'm happy to talk about AUKUS. We are a country that regards the number one responsibility of our government as to making sure that our nation is secure. And I think every country probably shares a similar objective for its own country. We have been observing our strategic environment with, very closely over recent years, and it's begun to deteriorate much more rapidly than we'd anticipated. And military modernisation and expansion in the region has been occurring at an unprecedented rate. We are making decisions based on what we think is best for our security and what we think is best for our prosperity in a region that's been undergoing unprecedented strategic change. And underneath that, we really do want a stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific. So the decisions that we make about our security are made on the basis of our own sovereign assessment of what that security is. And we're confident that the decisions we make, we're hopeful that they will meet the needs that we set for ourselves. We have made decisions about AUKUS. We've talked about AUKUS in the past. And AUKUS is a partnership that exists between Australia and the United Kingdom and the United States. These are countries which are very, very old partners of Australia. They have been very close partners with us for decades and perhaps hundreds of years in one case. And we are very old friends. And we are also very committed to our other partnerships that we belong to, including things like ASEAN, the very close relations that we have with our Pacific family. IORA is another one. APEC is another one. We think that AUKUS complements, it doesn't compete in any way with those. And we are very open about what we're planning to do, and we continue to be. And we think it complements what's a very multi-dimensional range of engagements in Southeast Asia. And we also welcome the support we've had just in terms of the Quad from Japan and India for the AUKUS announcement. I guess, we think that our strategic environment has become much more challenging. We have very, very large ocean approaches to protect on north, south and east. I mean east, west and south. We've got big oceans surrounding us, and it takes a lot of endurance to be able to maintain, I suppose, maritime awareness of those ocean areas. And we think that the endurance and capabilities of nuclear submarines will meet that need more than any other kind of need. We are not proposing, and we never will propose, to become nuclear armed. We're talking about propulsion here. We're talking about something that means that submarines don't need to be refueled and that they can remain at sea for a large amount of time and don't need to be refueled. That's it. We will be extremely cautious and extremely assiduous in ensuring that we stick to our non-proliferation obligations. We've been a model non-proliferator. Will continue to be a model non-proliferator, and we will make sure that the appropriate safeguards are in place and will be pursued and maintained with great determination and care. So, we do think that climate change is something that requires proactive thinking and ideas. We think that we've come up with quite a few ideas ourselves, and we would be more than delighted to pursue additional ideas with Bangladesh. We remain resolutely committed to our Paris Agreement commitments. We have a good record of keeping to those commitments. If I can just say, we're on track to exceed our 2030 emission targets. We've reduced our emissions by over 20% since 2005 and 2020. That compares to an OECD average of 6%. Since 2017, we have invested more than $35 billion in renewable energy in Australia, and we're deploying new wind and solar at 10 times the global average per person. We also have the world's highest uptake of rooftop solar, and 1 in 4 of our households now has rooftop solar systems. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation in Australia is the world's largest green bank. It's mobilised over $9.1 billion for green energy or clean energy projects with a total value of $31 billion. And the Australian Renewable Energy Agency has mobilised over $1.7 billion in grant funding so that we can accelerate our shift to affordable and renewable energy. We've also got a $2.5 billion emissions reduction fund, which is one of the world's largest and most robust carbon offset schemes, and that is something that is still going quite well. So, I mean, these are the things that we have done. Our plan is focused on how we can continue to do that and how we can increase our own ambition, how we can meet net zero as soon as possible by 2050, ideally. And we want to develop practical, scalable solutions. We're very interested in how technology can support those, and I've already mentioned a few of the ways in which we see that as being possible. And we do see, I think, LNG as a viable transition fuel. We are currently the world's largest LNG exporter. As Ambassador Tariq said, I think we exchange places from time to time with Qatar in terms of holding that title. And we would very much welcome the opportunity to export LNG to Bangladesh. We would welcome the opportunity to talk to the government here about it. We have had discussions from time to time with them. I mean, in the end, there are commercial considerations at play, but I can assure you that our LNG producers in Australia would be very happy to provide their product to this country, and we believe they can do so reliably and at a competitive cost. And if you think about where our main LNG fields are, they're in the northwest of Australia, or off the northwest coast of Australia, in fact, and the sea lanes to Bangladesh are quite effectively traversed by ships. So there's a proximity argument in favour of it, I think, as well. Let me see. I guess, Deb, your points about the prospectivity of trade and investment are ones that we are also very conscious of, and we would like to see all of the things that you've happened increase. You mentioned duty-free access. We don't have any plans at this stage to end that arrangement, and you'd be aware that Australia, as a general rule, has very, very few tariff barriers to entry, but there are none to the products of this country. We are currently talking to your government about how LDC graduation can affect our development program here. I think you and a couple of others mentioned skills acquisition. That's one area that we have already started to talk to the Bangladesh government about. We would envisage that our development program over the next few years will also transition to become more of a kind of an economic development partnership, as it were, and moving away from the traditional kind of service delivery support. So we'll be about trying to develop ways in which we can help build your capacity to manage the economic challenges that LDC graduation implies. And that includes providing the sorts of skills that a growing economy like Bangladesh needs, and one that satisfies the aspirations of your growing and ambitious urban middle class for education and for the kinds of things that I suppose middle class people want everywhere. Also agree with your suggestion about economic relationships and exchanges. I think that's something that's underdone, and I'd love to sit down with you one day and talk about how we might change that. We've been, I don't know if you saw, but it's not quite the same thing, but it certainly provides avenues to it, which was the opening of the Monash College uniting the Universal College Bangladesh partnership recently. They've got a campus just up the road from here where I'm sitting at the moment, and that will be a way of providing pathways for students, but it also means that there's now a direct connection between a major Australian university and an educational institution in this country, and I hope that that will provide maybe the platform for further exchanges and more formal academic relationships of the type that you mentioned. Masood, you mentioned rising concern about climate change. I hope I've kind of answered the question there. I think these are things that we will welcome the opportunity to have further and more detailed discussions with your government, with all of the people around this table as well. And we share everybody's concern about climate change. We recognise that it's a challenging environment for the world to deal with, no pun intended. We are going to be attending the conference. Our Prime Minister will be attending the Glasgow conference with the intention of contributing to positive solutions for the world. Okay, so finally on the climate change thing, I'll just reiterate that we have a clear plan to try and bring down the cost of new and emerging low emissions technologies. We have a low emissions technology roadmap, and that's going to guide, we hope, about $20 billion worth of government investment to 2030 and leverage about $80 billion more from the private sector. And it sets stretch goals for priority emissions technologies such as clean hydrogen, which is something that we think has great potential. I mentioned carbon capture and storage. And low carbon materials and construction of them or production of them like steel and aluminium, and long duration energy storage and soil carbon. So if we can get to a point where the price difference between current technologies and low emissions technologies removed, then I think we're in a position where global adoption of these technologies will happen. And of course, underpinning that is a concern, and I think it was you, Ambassador Tariq, who mentioned this, that we still need to provide energy to our economies, and we don't want to prevent countries from continuing their path towards further economic development, and having reliable energy sources is very much a key to that. So it's a challenge balancing that reliability and that green imperative as well, and we're very, very conscious of that in Australia, and we're conscious that it's a key part of the thinking of countries like Bangladesh. So I guess all in all, I still think that the future is golden, but I don't deny that there are significant challenges globally that we need to meet, and the best way we can meet them, I think, is by taking advantage of that golden future and working together in ways that help us to meet those challenges constructively and in ways that support the welfare of the people of our two countries. And I think in closing, I would just like to reiterate my thanks to you all, to the Cosmos Foundation, for taking so much of your time on a Saturday morning to listen to me. And we certainly listen to what you've had to say, and we will be communicating that back to our masters in Canberra, and we're very grateful for the time that you've given us to explain our positions. As I also said at the outset, I look forward to catching up with all of you in person again fairly soon, because I've missed you. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Well, Shamsher is here today, but when we were little, this was about a century ago, Our parents had taken us to the seashore at a place called Kolkata, which is in Barisal, where we lived. And Barisal those days was an intensely English town. I mean, the school was English, the club was English, the large English population in the city. So in Kolkata, we were told that across the bay, way in the distance lies Australia. Now, those days, I thought as a child that the world comprised England, Barisal, and Australia. You see, so today, of course, we know it's not true. But Australia remains a very important component in my mind's eye global system. We've had a very wide-ranging and stimulating discussion today. I thank all the participants, in particular High Commissioner Brewer, for the time and the immensely valuable contributions. I shan't attempt to summarize the discussions, of course, but suffice it is to say that we have underscored the close ties that bind our two countries. As you have said just now, the High Commissioner, the future may not be golden, and we are aware that both countries face challenges. In the case of Bangladesh, these are largely economic, but as the indices suggest that we are making progress in meeting them. Australia has other regional concerns, including its issues with its largest trading partner, China. But it's responding to it in a manner where it also seeks to protect, as you have also said, its perceived interest in securing its own shores, own frontiers. These are issues that I'm sure Australia will overcome and muddle through, and it's not for nothing that Donald Horner has called it the lucky country. But our broad extrapolation is that there are huge potentials to expand our collaboration, not just bilaterally, though also that, but also across the multilateral spectrum. And this is the challenge that we would wish our leadership to focus on. With these few words, I would like to close the discussion at that stage, the substantive discussion, but we'll give the floor finally to Mr. Inayatullah Khan for his concluding remarks as our host.
Thank you, Mr. Bhai. It has been a very fascinating roundtable. Let me thank our keynote speaker, Mr. Jeremy Brewer, and all our distinguished discussants, Ambassador Shamsher Mobin Chowdhury, Dr. Deborah Bhattacharya, Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, Brigadier General Shahidul Anam Khan, and Ambassador Tariq Karim for their very incisive and insightful deliberations on the prospects of the relations between Bangladesh and Australia. The entire gamut of relations between the two sides run deep and wide, which is only to be expected when we speak of two nations whose fates, if I may say, are intertwined as that of Australia and Bangladesh. The roundtable has been a long one, but every moment has been worthwhile. The subject that has been discussed has touched upon climate collaboration in the new fields like technology collaboration, health collaboration, security collaboration, collaboration on global issues, disaster management. I think hardly any subject has been left unattended. So I think it was a very, very productive, wonderful roundtable. And I would like to say that my personal involvement with Australia also runs very deep on climate change. I've been collaborating with Dr. Jim Frazier, the world-renowned Australian environmentalist, who's the founder of the Symphony of the Earth, and I'm the co-founder. We have already come out with a very significant publication, which you will be receiving soon, and with the intention that we will be making one of the best movies on climate change based on the Symphony of the Earth. So I believe that Cosmos has already laid the foundation for our climate collaboration between Australia and Bangladesh, and we can take it further. As to the cultural collaboration, we were lucky enough to host the first and only indigenous Australian painters exhibition at our gallery, Cosmos. So I'm very proud and very happy with our existing collaboration. I think it can be enhanced, it can be increased if we put our minds together. And I think if we keep our 50 years of our relationship, we can definitely organize, a festival where our foundation would be ready to support. We would be very keen to publish a book, telling the story of our 50 years of relations between Bangladesh and Australia. I would think that Australian High Commission would also would be a part of this venture. And I would also request the discussants to submit, whatever they have said today, which will eventually be appearing in this book, which will celebrate our 50 years of friendly ties between Australia and Bangladesh.
Yes, I think that was one thing I did mention the suggestion about the indigenous visitors to Bangladesh.
Yeah.
I don't know what plans we have, but it's something that we certainly take on board. And increasingly, we want to celebrate our indigenous culture and the contribution they make to our country. And we will certainly look at that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just thought time is running out, so I should probably be bold. Forgive me.
Thank you. Thank you, High Commissioner. I would also like to thank Nahar and her team for setting up this very seamless and beautiful, our roundtable. I think technically it was absolutely seamless. So thank you, Nahar, and your team for giving us all this support. And in conclusion, I would like that we can join our hands in applauding our joint and very successful event today. I wish you all very good health and hope we will meet up again in person in very, very near future. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.